Hi, I'm Eric the Car Guy, and I'm not sitting in front of the camera talking to you right now because on the day that I shot this, wasn't feeling all that great, and I honestly wasn't feeling like shooting Eric the Car Guy videos, and I had an engine to take out of a car. So I decided just to set up two cameras, let them roll, and see where I could go with it. Right here, I believe I'm disconnecting the negative battery cable, which is like one of the first steps. As you can see, I've already got the wheels off. I've already got it up on jack stands. So it's just a matter of one thing at a time when you're dealing with a big job like this. And you just take your time and try to cover everything. I like to work in like quadrants and areas. So I'll work in a certain area, move to another area, and just try to keep everything going. I like walking on walls. A lot of people have mentioned that my flag is hung backwards. I have since moved it. If you watch the RE Slow Pay video, I've switched it around. I had reasons for hanging it the way that I did. Now that lots of people are watching, no longer valid, so I'm going to accommodate them. Right here, I'm knocking the lower ball joint loose on this right-hand side with the traditional method as shown in the axle ball joint video that I did some time ago. Smack it with a hammer, hit what it goes through is how my instructor taught me years ago. Now I'm checking the transmission fluid. I'm finding that it's way overfilled. A lot of people don't maintain Honda transmissions properly, and the fluid needs to be checked with the car off instead of on. And you need to use Honda fluid, because if you don't, problems could happen. In fact, and more often than not. But some people have mentioned synthetic fluid and some other things that I've yet to try, so at least using regular Dextron's not going to work. I hope you like that little fast bit there. What am I doing? Looks like I'm removing the lower splash shield, getting that off. Watch the fat guy get up and walk away. Now I'm knocking the ball joint loose on the other side and taking the axle out through the magic of editing. You really can't see anything under here, so I didn't really see the point of trying to go into too much detail. But here you can see me just sort of under the engine there a little bit, and decided to speed this up just to make it interesting. But like I was saying, it's a matter of like one thing at a time. I think I just took the exhaust manifold off there, or the downpipe, not the manifold. Just took the downpipe off. Now we're taking the coolant reservoir away. And now I think it's the upper radiator hose. You don't need me talking to you about this stuff. You can see very clearly what I'm doing now, can't you? I don't usually do these commentaries. It's kind of strange. Now I know how those directors feel when they're doing those DVDs. To get the hose off, I move the clamps back, but then I take my channel locks and open them up all the way, and they just seem to be just the right size to where I can put them on the outside of the hose and rock it back and forth just to break it loose. I was told to cut the hoses long ago, not to do what I just did, but I've done this so many times, I don't seem to have killed any hoses doing it, just because, I don't know, you develop techniques, you develop a feel for things. The more you do it. Experience is a great teacher with auto mechanics. Now I sprayed a little bit of penetrating oil on the screw clamp for the intake, because a lot of times that screw, if you strip it out, you're going to have a heck of a time getting that out of there. So just a little bit of penetrating oil, let it sit for a while. So in the meantime, I'm disconnecting some electrical connectors here off the, looks like that's the intake air temperature sensor, and I just did the map sensor. And now I'm going to try to break loose that clamp. And I often use my pliers to pinch where plastic clips are. Just try to pinch those closed and pull them apart. It seems to work pretty well. Now we're going for the airbox. There's these two fasteners up top, but this airbox is a little bit different. It's got one fastener that we're about to see here soon. It's like we're in an earthquake. One fastener down there, and then when you take things apart and it's not coming right apart, just sort of wiggle a little bit, and you can usually see where it's connected. So once you find where it's connected, just try and loosen that fastener. And I found this one up underneath the front of the airbox, and had to go and get some other tools. But was able to knock that fastener loose, and that still wasn't enough. It was actually on a little rubber grommet down there, and rather than trying to mess with it all day. It was kind of in a precarious spot. I didn't feel like taking the radiator and the fan out to get to one fastener. I used silicone spray on the rubber. Silicone spray works really well if you've got rubber mounts, and once I had that silicone on there, Big Bertha here was able to pop it loose and remove the airbox. Next, that's the lower part of the airbox. You see it's kind of like a horseshoe there, and that's so that it doesn't suck up water and kill your engine. Let's see. What am I doing here? Oh yeah, that's the ground cable that goes to the transmission. And that's such a small and seems like a specialized fastener. I usually just screw it right back into where it came from. That helps me find it again later. Now it looks like we're taking the distributor off. I've already popped the spark plug wires out of the wells. So I'm taking the 3 fasteners from the outside of the distributor loose and take those out. I like to do some stuff by hand and some stuff with my impact, and a lot of times it just depends on what's handy. But no point in marking this because there'll be a whole new engine there, so you can just pull that right out. And I try to keep all my parts with their fasteners, so when I set things aside I keep them down there with fasteners. And sometimes electrical connectors, there's parts on the inside of them that come out, and that's what happened in this case. So I'm trying to reinstall the little plastic piece that popped apart. Was able to get that back together in the right way. I think that was for the VTEC solenoid. I can't remember. Looks like I am doing the lower radiator hose here, and I'm using the same method that I showed on the upper radiator hose. Is I'll pull the clamp back and take my channel locks to knock it loose the rest of the way. At least I think that's what I'm doing. Like magic, I went and did something else. But yeah, I'm gonna knock that loose with the channel locks. And once it's broken loose from the connection, you can just slide it right off. And it looks like I'm doing a heater hose there. That one goes to the cylinder head. On the bottom, underneath the distributor, you got to watch those because sometimes the distributor leaks oil onto those and will cause them to swell up and sometimes leak. Instead of replacing the whole hose, what I usually end up doing is putting the distributor O-ring on, cutting off the bad part of the hose, and putting it back on there. It seems to last a good long while. It's kind of a specialized hose. You can just use a regular heater hose, but it's not quite the same size. Just a little tip if you run into that. And for me, I like to only disconnect what I have to. So I don't want to take that whole entire hose off or take the radiator out or anything if I don't need to. And here I think I'm disconnecting the mount. There's a front mount there on the transmission. There's actually 5 engine mounts on this engine transmission. 3 major and 2 minor. There's one by the timing cover, one by the transmission, one underneath the intake, and then there's 2 what I call secondary mounts that are on the front of the transmission that I just disconnected, and then down by the AC bracket, or AC compressor bracket in the front of the engine. So you need to obviously get all those loose if you're going to get the engine out of the car. What am I doing here? Probably the most difficult part of this job is dealing with the things under the intake. There's a lot of wires there. There's a lot of hoses there. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be disconnected in this area. So I would say that that's probably the most difficult part of it. But as you can see, remove the distributor and you've got a lot more room to work with. There's some electrical connections there for the coolant temperature sensor. I can't remember. I can never remember which one's the fan switch and which one's the temp sensor. Here I'm closing up the radiator. I've been draining it the whole time. So I drained out the radiator into my pan. I'm going to get rid of that. Bring in some cardboard, slide up underneath, and I believe I'm going to disconnect as a bracket underneath the intake manifold that I'm going to take off. You can get a lot better access. There's 2 fasteners on the intake. There's 2 fasteners on the back of the block, right up where the exhaust hooks up. So you need to get that out of the way. Looks like I'm doing the idle air control valve and throttle position sensor there. Disconnecting the connectors on those. Yeah, that's that, I think... Oh, right there is the vacuum line going to the brake booster that I'm disconnecting. I'm just going to pull that up out of the way and fold it up under something. What else do we have underneath there? There's part of the wiring harness that goes to the alternator. Also goes to the oil pressure switch and the knock sensor back there. Stuff underneath the intake, be real careful with. I broke the PCV valve. I broke also the knock sensor. And I went to unplug the knock sensor and I just pulled on the connector and the whole thing came apart. There's a lot of heat up under that intake. The exhaust is directly under there, so that stuff back there gets kind of brittle after it sits for a while. I just took the throttle cable off. Now that's the cruise control I'm removing so I can get to that mount. I think maybe next. Looks like I've got some more those connectors or whatever that are underneath the intake that go to the alternator and the knock sensor and oil pressure switch, or oil pressure sensor. Yeah, actually it's just a switch. It's not a sensor. It's just there for the idiot light. It doesn't have an actual oil pressure gauge. This looks like the fuel return line that I'm disconnecting. Just pull that off and flop that up out of the way. Who's next? The main fuel supply. As you see, it's sprayed everywhere. Not a good idea to be smoking when you do that. And then for the fuel line, I just take that nut and the washers and just sort of run them back onto the fuel rail so that's all in one place. The idea is I leave myself little breadcrumbs. I think I'm doing a ground cable there. I leave myself little breadcrumbs so that when I go to reassemble, it's a lot easier. If you just throw everything in a box, I don't have the mental capacity to remember where all this stuff goes. I try to give myself, like I said, little breadcrumbs, little places where I can go and find where things went. And somebody actually asked me once, with a wiring harness, how do you know where everything goes? Well, a lot of times with wiring harnesses especially, sometimes vacuum lines too, if you just lay them in the place where you think they go, a lot of times it'll become clear because they have a memory to them. They've been sitting there for a while, and if you just sort of lay them where you think they go, a lot of times it'll be able to line them up and plug everything in. And most times connectors that are close to each other don't have the same connector, thankfully. There are some instances where they are, but a lot of times they'll have different colors or what have you. This is the other heater hose here, and you'll see the engine moving quite a bit because it only has that mount over by the timing belt and the mount on the transmission that are pretty much holding it in now. So if you have a bad engine mount, this is bad rear engine mount, that's what you'll see. You'll see the whole engine flopping around like that. No idea what I'm disconnecting here. It's probably important though. I think I'm still messing with that wiring harness up under there. And now for the injectors, because that has to go and wrap around the intake there. I like this camera angle. You can see quite a bit. There's a couple of fasteners that hold that harness down at the alternator bracket, and there's another one up on the intake that I think I'm getting here. Putting the fasteners up on the windshield, moving stuff out of the way. I think the next thing to come out of the way and make my life easier, well, that's that other harness bracket that's on the alternator. On the alternator bracket, I should say. I got that fastener off. I think next is the power steering line. Which is, I'm going to take the ground off up there first. Another engine ground that comes off of that bracket, or sometimes I've seen it run to the valve cover. Just depends on what model engine you've got and you're working with. More stuff underneath. I try to get all the stuff done underneath first because I hate that part. But someday we'll have a lift, and we can get you up under there with a camera and everything. It'll be fun. And I won't have to roll around like a weeble wobble anymore. Let's see. I think this is like the last part here, because that upper camera, the battery went dead, coming up here fairly soon. So I was only able to get so much of this view here, and now we're getting to the end of it. Yeah, I've got this power steering line. It's just those two fasteners. I ended up taking off the power steering pump altogether. I took that line and just sort of put it up underneath the windshield washer tubing that held it in place. Sometimes I use bungee cords to hold things in place too. In fact, I used a bungee cord to take the AC compressor off. I didn't disconnect the AC, but I did unbolt the AC compressor from the engine block and just left the 4 fasteners in it and everything, and just took the whole thing and ran a bungee cord from inside the frame up underneath to another part of the frame that's held that in place so it wasn't dangling by the lines, which is not something you want to do. I think from this point on, all we've got is this camera, because I think the battery died on the upper camera. Yeah, I think that's the case. And I think now I'm just getting the last of the wiring harness off down there underneath the intake, and now, yeah, we can just pull all that out of the way. And actually, in my opinion, the hard part's over. This is all that stuff that you got to be careful with and not break things. Hopefully you don't break things like I did, but be real careful around those knock sensors. They're expensive and hard to find. And PCV valves, I think I go into later in the video. I prefer the Honda type as opposed to the aftermarket type. I have seen the aftermarket type affect the idle, sometimes adversely. But now with the wiring harness out of the way and all the tubes and everything disconnected, there was one vacuum line in the very back on the intake on this engine. This is a Y8 engine, for those of you that it's in an EX. It's a single overhead cam VTEC. For those of you that are into that sort of thing. Now I'm bringing out my trusty seat belt that I've used to pull a couple of engines. I've even used it to tow people out of ditches with my truck in the past. They're very useful. So if you're at the salvage yard, grab a seatbelt or two. Bring a knife with you. They're very useful things and very strong. And speed things up again, because once again we're down to the one camera. I wish I had that one up there, but you know, hey, that's what happened. I didn't even have the LCD screen on, and the battery just tanked out on me. Yeah, if you're new to Eric the Car Guy, just before this video, I'd done an engine in a Dodge truck and an engine in a Chevy truck. So doing the Civic engine, it was like really easy, comparatively speaking. Everything was light, easy to get to. I didn't have to worry about all kinds of stuff. But anyway, gonna send you back live here to Eric the Car Guy. A little easier than them trucks. Yeah, that part's easier too. And now we're back with our rolling commentary. Once again, it just seemed a little bit easier just to set the cameras up and let them roll. Here's a piece of the block. We'll show that a little bit later. I sped this up again. The object here is to remove all the stuff from the block. I'm going to start by removing the intake manifold. And there's some fasteners that are up underneath, and there's some fasteners up on the top. To get to. A lot easier with it out of the car rather than in the car. And we'll be pulling that off right there. Go ahead and set that aside. And I also kept all the fasteners together. And I believe I just popped out a fastener on the VTEC solenoid. So I'm going to pop that off and set that aside. And no idea what I just took. Oh yeah, that PCV box. Just took that off. And next, there's the thermostat housing and tube that runs to the back of the water pump. It can be kind of stuck in there, and you just gotta wiggle it a little bit. And there's just some fasteners that hold the thermostat housing firm behind where the distributor goes above the transmission. But wiggle it a little bit, eventually that whole tube will come out. Now there's the support bracket that goes between the transmission and the oil pan. That is the access plate to the torque converter bolts. I'm gonna spin it around and remove those torque converter bolts one at a time. And with the broken rod, I had to turn it one way and turn it the other, but I was actually able to just get all those fasteners out to get that torque converter loose. And now a different angle. That last fastener on the exhaust manifold shield would rust it away so much that I just took it. They're usually 12 millimeter. I took an 11 millimeter and hammered it on with my impact socket, and was able to get enough of a bite on it to spin it out, and I'm able to use another bolt. When I took the shield off, first thing I saw was that the manifold was cracked, which we'll get a closer look at in a little bit. So that's the reason why I'm removing the O2 sensor. Otherwise, I would have left the O2 sensor in, because I'm just going to bolt it up to the other engine. But since it was cracked and I was aiming to replace it, I needed to strip it down, basically. I have welded them in the past. Sort of works, at least for a little while, but yeah, you're almost better off replacing it. There's also that bracket that holds it to the bottom of the block there that you need to concern yourself with. And here I am showing the cracked manifold. See, look what I got. It was actually cracked in more places than that when you flipped it around the other way. But we'll get a closer look at that a little later in the video. And now there's the AC compressor bracket. And as soon as you remove that, oh, look at that. That's really yucky. And then the power steering pump bracket. Now let's get a look inside.
Check this out. Hole in the block. And then pieces. This is what happens when an engine does not have oil. Very bad things happen. Very bad things. You can see all the way through. You see that? All the way through the other side. Pieces go flying. You can see where the connecting rod beat the heck out of the inside of the block there until it just came apart. This is just gross. All because of no oil. No oil. I'm honestly not sure why the oil all dissipated. Because there's some leaking out of here or whatever. I had originally thought that the oil pressure switch had let go. But looking at it now, I'm not seeing that. Another hole for you. Just cascaded all down the block. Because you can see there's a great deal of oil coating all in here, but that could have happened after the engine went. I think it was just run low on oil and then it died. Anyway, this is the open hole. All kinds of fun. Hardest part's getting the harness out of the way. It's not too bad. Nothing like working on those trucks anyway. And as you can see, it all came out in one piece. So, given that my knock sensor, when I pulled the connector off of it, came out in two pieces, my PCV valve came out in two pieces. I tried to take that out, and actually I should have just left it in there and pulled the whole assembly off and just swapped that around, but it didn't work out that way. So, and personally I quite prefer the Honda PCV valves as opposed to the aftermarket ones. They flow a lot differently and help it idle better. And here's the new one. I'm a little disappointed because this engine was pretty expensive. I would dare say I'd just call this thing a long block. I wouldn't even call it a used engine. Because, come on, I mean, they go through the trouble to paint it, but get this, they just cut that hose. So they couldn't even bother to pull the hose off, or the sensors or any other stuff. They just piecemealed it. That's what they did. So I'm not real happy with this. And I did not do this. Actually, the guy that owns this car did this. Well, now I'm going to pull the transmission off of here. I'm going to knock all the fasteners loose except for this one. Lay it down on the ground and just pry it apart. And then I got to go get some parts for it before I can finish this job up. Because it's a lot easier to put that exhaust manifold with a crack in it. There it is. See a crack in that exhaust manifold? So I got a cracked exhaust manifold, a broken knot sensor, a broken PCV valve, and obviously a broken block. This little girl's hurt. She'll get better after I get done with her though.
Alright, we're coming to the last part of the trip here as far as this video goes. Drop the engine down on the ground because obviously my seatbelt is tied to the transmission and the engine, and it's not going to be possible to take them apart while it's in the air. So I took my seatbelt off, and that final fastener that I said that I'd leave, stuck a pry bar in between the two, and there you go. We have engine and transmission now. Yay! Trying to figure out how to stand that thing up. Well, last thing to remove from the block is the alternator and its bracket. I took them all out at once because it was just so much easier to do it that way than to take the alternator out in the car. I had to remove some of the electrical connectors that were bracketed to the strut tower, but to get those out of the way so I didn't damage them when I removed the engine block. And the last thing we have is this little bracket here, and I believe we're about done.
Alright, well, yet again, it looks like we have a two-part thing going on here. So this will be part one, and we'll wrap it up with part two. Anyway, I'm Eric the Car Guy. You can always visit me at EricTheCarGuy.com, or follow me on Facebook and Twitter, or the podcast on Sundays at noon with Rich Baxter from CarAndTruckTalk.com. Other than that, be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.
Cheer up, Eric. It's not the end of the world there, buddy.